Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Mellow Mind Shop, where I make things and I show you. I'm your host Mellow, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how I made a quilt coat from scratch. If you work on it all spring and summer, it'll be ready just in time for that fall weather. Before getting things started, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, Mellow Minds. That's right, me. So, if you want to support me and this channel, head on over to mellowminds.com, the link is in the description, and buy something cool like this upcycled sweatshirt I made. These two hands. Go on, get it, before someone else does, then it's gone. Alright, let's get into it. Okay, so starting off with materials. I decided to do a little cheat at the beginning, and when I say from scratch, I actually purchased 3 small jelly roll bundles of batik 2.5-inch strip fabrics, along with a couple yards of black Kona cotton. I really like the Kona cotton fabrics. They have really nice, rich pigments, and I don't think I've ever run across a batik that I don't like, so as long as those 3 sets I felt went together, I was good to go. The first thing I had to get squared away was that 1 out of the 3 rolls had to get trimmed down to match that 2.5 inches that the other 2 were, because it was cut with a pinking shear type cut, making it not fray as much, but also making it slightly wider than the other rolls of fabric. So after I evened all of those out, I went ahead and cut strips of the black Kona cotton into 2.5-inch strips so that I could get started on the basket weave pattern that I decided to go with for my quilting blocks. After I had my 2.5-inch strips ready, I went ahead and cut the black Kona fabric into 2.5-inch squares and cut any of the batik strips into 2.5-inch squares and 4.5-inch strips so that I could create the basket weave pattern that I wanted. Once all my fabric is prepped and ready, I'm ready to start sewing. I added the black squares to the batik squares and just did that in bulk until the piles were done. Then I start using this little handy snipper saver, which is just an old rotary blade inside this little plastic snowflake. And it just makes it a lot easier and quicker to get those chains cut after doing the bulk sewing. After ironing open all the seams, I'm ready to start pairing up those fabrics with their original 4.5-inch strips. Then I take these fabrics in sets of 4 and match them up in a way I find pleasing. When I have all of my sets of 4 together, I'm ready to sew the 4.5-inch strips to the 2.5-inch squares that I had previously sewn to start creating that basket weave pattern. I sew these in bulk, stiff the chains, iron down the seams, and then continue this process until the blocks are finished. Now that I'm finished with my quilting blocks, I need to know what pattern I'm going to use in order to know how big and what orientation I need to put these blocks together. So after searching and searching and searching for a coat pattern that I liked for this project, I just really couldn't find anything that I was looking for. So under the guise of fixing my mom's coat, which I did do, I also took copious amounts of measurements and decided to dupe that coat that I already know that she loves and I also love the style of. It has a good hood, I like the way it's overlaid, and I decided to go a route where I also didn't use zippers or buttons, which we'll get to that later. Once I decided on the pattern I was going to use, I decided that the basket weave pattern I would leave to the body of the coat, and I wanted to do something a little bit different for the sleeves and the hood, just to throw in some more quilting techniques in there. I decided to go with the sleeves and the hood to do a braid pattern where I took the remaining batik strips, put them into piles of a pleasing color order that I liked, and started building the braid pattern. After building my pattern pieces and making several mock-ups and adjustments, I was ready to move on to the next step of building the material that I was going to be using for this project. I did this by laying each pattern piece down and taking the quilt blocks I had created and laying them over top of the pattern piece, overlapping seam allowance, of course, until the material added up to bigger than the pattern piece. I then took this over to the sewing machine and started piecing those blocks together and made sure that it fit once everything was complete. Another thing I did for this project is I wanted to make sure that with the left and right panels, where they overlapped at, that it would be a continuous pattern and wouldn't be all jumbled up. I did run into a couple instances where I didn't add quite enough blocks, and instead of adding a full block, I was just able to add a square of black fabric into the areas that I missed, so that it's definitely going to be big enough to cover the pattern. All right, now I've got my pattern pieces. I got my fabric chunks that are bigger than my pattern pieces, just a little bit bigger. You want a little bit of space. Now I'm ready to start long arm quilting. Yes, 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 yes. All right, I already have the backing loaded onto the quilting frame and ready to go, covered up by a quilt. I'm currently hiding it from my mom because it is a gift for her and I don't want her to know what I'm making. So I got the backing on there, covered it up, and now I'm ready to put the batting on and get to quilting. For the basket weave quilt blocks, I decided to go with a free motion quilting of straight lines. It went fairly quicker than ruler work, and I think the straight lines turned out pretty nice and accentuated the basket weave pattern. At the time, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to fill in with that black negative space of the weave pattern, so I moved on down and went for the braid and decided to do a heart free motion quilting pattern. After some thought, I decided to fill in those negative black spaces in the basket weave patterns with these donut shaped ruler work that ended up making the whole jacket covered with X's and O's. Once I was done quilting the basket weave pattern block pieces and the braid pieces, I was ready to do everything else, which was just going to be done in black fabric that I had left over with a meandering quilting free motion pattern. And with that, all of the quilting is done. I'm ready to move on to cutting out my pattern pieces and start constructing this coat. I decided to start out with the black material, cutting out the sides of the hood, the undersides of the sleeve, and the facings for the hood.
They say that age kills the fire inside of a man. That he hears death coming. He opens the door and says, "Come in, give me rest." That is a pack of lies. I got enough fight in me to devour the world. So I fight.
After cutting out all the pattern pieces, I took some of the leftover material and turned that into the pockets that I was going to use, making sure to match up the X's with the front panels of the left and the right of the coat. Once I finished adding the pockets to the left and right sides of the coat, I decided that I wanted to move on to the sleeves and finish adding those together by sewing the raw edges together and then using binding to finish them and sew them down so that there was no seam showing. After I was done sewing my undersleeve to my upper sleeve, I went ahead and base stitched the top of the sleeve cap and also the curved parts of the sides of the hood. That way, when I went to sew everything together, I could gather up those curved bits so that they would fit perfectly into place. Once all the basting was done, I was ready to start putting the hood together. I started by pinning these straight edges together on both sides and then slowly gathering the curved edge so that it would fit right into the braid panel of the center of the hood. After everything was all pinned together, it was ready to get sewn up. I did this the same way as I did the upper and lower sleeve together by sewing it down and adding binding, sewing that binding down to give a nice clean edge with no raw edges showing. To finish the front edge of the hood, I went ahead and started putting my facing together, stitching it down and finishing the interior edge with some binding before adding that to the hood. After attaching the facing, I go ahead and turn the hood right side out and the facing towards the inside and reinforce the stitching on the very edge of the hood. Then I go ahead and stitch the innermost part of the facing down so nothing moves out of place. For this project, I'm gonna need a lot of binding. I'm going to be finishing all of the raw edges with binding for the hem, for the overlapping of the front, for the hem of the sleeves. I'm also going to be doing all of the interior seam allowance with binding to cover up all of those raw edges. So for this, I'm making my own binding. I highly recommend doing this. Making your own binding and bias tape is super easy and way less expensive than buying it in the store. After changing to a much needed new needle, I'm ready to start sewing up the sleeves. I do this just like I'd been doing before by sewing down the seam allowance and covering that with binding. Moving on to the main body of the coat, I start by, of course, putting my shoulder seams together, sewing those, doing the same thing with the side seams, binding them, sewing the binding down, and then finishing it off by hemming the bottom with the binding as well. Now that I'm done with the hood, the sleeves, and the body, I just need to sew all of those together, bind all the edges, and sew all those down, and then we'll be almost done with this coat. All right, and now that the coat is all put together, it is so close to being done. All I have to do is have a way to close it. So I decided with the hood flap, I wanted to do a button, something that was like a seashell, shiny, nice, pretty button. And for the rest of the closures, I wanted to go with some really nice frog closures. I scoured the internet, I looked at craft stores near me, and I wasn't really finding anything that I was in love with. They just seemed either too big or too dainty. So I decided to go to the craft store and got a spool of bead cording and pulled out my plastic thingamajig from the bottom of my beading drawer and made my own frog closures. It was pretty easy, pretty cute, and the thingamajig made sure that everything stayed a consistent sizing. I made sure to reinforce these frog closures with sewing them together, and then of course attach those to the coat. And after making a buttonhole and attaching my button, it was done. And with that, the coat is complete, done. Everything from scratch, and so happy with it. My mom is happy with it. She absolutely loved it. I could tell you that it's one thing getting compliments from just people walking around saying, oh my gosh, that coat is so cute. But when your mother gets cornered in a dark room by 5 quilters that want to inspect her coat before she leaves the establishment because they've been looking at it all night, whew, that gets me in my, whew, thank you so much. That's the best compliment I could hear. Thank you so much for joining me today and coming with me on this quilting coat journey. I know it's been a long time for me to get this video out, but here it is. And if you stuck with me till the end, please like and subscribe if you want to stick around, if you like what you see, and check out some of my other videos, and I look forward to making more.